been betrayed in so many ways, but one crucial way they've been betrayed is by what this generation and this government and the previous one have been doing when it comes to protecting our environment. We know we had the hottest year on record last year. You almost think, what else does the environment need to be doing to be taken seriously? All the signs are there, and it is young people who are going to be bearing the brunt of a wrecked environment. And that's why it's so important that when we come to making that pitch to, yes, the country at large, but to young people in particular, I think climate change, the environment, looking after our precious resources has to be up there.
And I'm joined now by the Green MEP, Molly Scott-Cato. Welcome back to the programme. Now, at the campaign launch, you promised to scrap university tuition fees, to increase NHS funding, to roll back cuts to local council spending. How much would all that cost, and how would you pay for it?
Well, like all the other parties, we haven't got our costed manifesto yet. It's only been a few days since the election was announced. I'm very happy to come back and explain the figures to you once those are there. Well, like all the parties, we haven't produced a costed manifesto yet. We had a manifesto last time around and most of the promises were still there and we had funding for them, but obviously public spending figures have changed, so we're not in a position to do that, but we will be in a week or so. What
taxes to pay for this and much more that you'd like to do would you consider raising?
We would certainly consider having higher taxes for the better off in society. I think that, we do need to increase the amount of taxes wealthier people pay.
How do you define better off?
Well, again, I'm not entirely clear about what the precise number would be, but I think probably 100,000 people would pay a little bit more income, 100,000, and 150,000, I would say quite considerably more. But I think the real focus needs to be on companies that are avoiding paying their taxes, and I work on that a lot in my role in the European Parliament. We see enormous amounts of tax avoidance by companies moving their profits from country to country. We need to have that European cooperation to make that successful.
Yet it hasn't made that much difference yet, has it?
Actually, we've made a lot of changes to
laws. Well, last year
laws.
Google had turnover in this country of $8 billion and it paid $25 million in tax. That was simply last year.
But there was a considerable fine on Apple, as you recall, which Margrethe Vestager, the Competition Commissioner, introduced. And in the case of Google, we need to change the laws so that people cannot move their profit from country to country and set up shell companies.
But you couldn't base, I know you want to do it, everybody wants to do it, but you couldn't base a big spending programme on the ability to do that. You'd have to increase other taxes.
If you just look at the cost of free student tuition fees and also maintenance grants to students, that would come in at about 10 billion a year. And so one way of paying for that would be to remove the upper threshold on national insurance, which would bring in about 28 billion a year. So that's the sort of order of magnitude we're talking about. It's not vast, and some of the proposals we've got, like for example,
but that would be a 10% increase on the better off tax, right?
National insurance on people earning above national insurance on people earning above 42,000, yes.
So above 42,000 you'd have another 10% tax.
I can't remember exactly how much the national insurance rate changes by, but I know that in the government figures it's about 28 billion.
So at the moment, if you're on 42,000 or 40, I think it's moving up to 45, a bit more, you pay a marginal rate of 40%, you would have them pay a marginal rate of over 50%.
We would just put the national insurance rate on higher incomes.
Well, that would be the equivalent of a marginal rate of over 50%. If you're a school head of an English department on 50, 60,000 a year, you'd face a marginal rate under you of over 50%.
It's probably not useful to do this in a sort of mental maths exercise, but if you think about other proposals, like for example, stricter controls on landlords, we could have a landlord licensing system, longer term leases on properties, so young people particularly, but also older people who rent could have more security. That needn't cost anything at all. We could insist on landlords paying for that.
The mental arithmetic seems quite clear, but no doubt we'll come back to that as it goes on. How's the Progressive Alliance coming on?
Well, it's actually going quite well. There's a lot of interest. I'm hearing a lot of discussions at local level. I think we need to set this in context. There's a lot of progressives in the country who are very concerned about the crisis in our public services, in our prisons, the social care system, and also about the Tories' very hard, extreme Brexit that they're threatening.
So you want the left to come together?
Well, basically, Theresa May's given us an opportunity here. She's taken a risk because she's got problems with her backbenchers. She doesn't think she can get through Brexit with this small majority, so there's an opportunity there. And what we're saying is progressives need to come together and cooperate. Conservatives are very effective at using the first-past-the-post system. We've got to become effective as well.
But do you accept that this Progressive Alliance cannot happen, cannot become the government, unless Mr Corbyn is the Prime Minister? How could it happen otherwise?
Well, I think that's a secondary question. To me, the primary question is who do people choose to vote for? How you make a government afterwards comes after the election. In most countries, that's the case.
I understand that, but we have the system we have. And my question is, you accept that this progressive alliance cannot be in power unless Mr Corbyn is the Prime Minister?
Personally, I think Mr Corbyn is less of a threat to the country than Theresa May. I think she's shown herself to be an extremely authoritarian leader. She has said she doesn't want to have what she defines as dissidents, which I would say was reasonable opposition. And what we're suggesting at the moment is there is a way of avoiding that very hard Brexit
and the price
damaging
would be
to our
Mr
public
Corbyn
services.
as Prime Minister.
Well,
You would be happy with
to me, that's not a price. I mean, this is an election where people choose between Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May as our Prime Minister, because that's the way our election system works.
And you would prefer Mr Corbyn?
I would, but it's also a system where people have to see...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.